He said, Mom, these guys just tried to fight me.
When all the shooting started happening, everybody started running.
That was probably the biggest shootout in my experience.
He was gone. That was the worst moment in my life.
There was a large gathering of gang members at the club.
He needed to shoot at these people to save his friend's life.
I told everybody, get out, get out, get out.
My client was trying to defuse the situation.
I was concerned that we'd have to dismiss the case. Who fired the shot that killed Nico? We don't know.
For those most affected by a homicide, the first 48 is just the beginning. This is the story of the fight for justice in the weeks, months, and years.
County 911, what's the location of your emergency?
Midnight Blue. There's armed people shooting at this club.
How many people are shooting?
I don't know. We've already heard about 30 shots.
They're on their way. They'll be there shortly. County Police.
Oh, yeah, my place is shot. I just left it lights out.
Where are you?
The Shell gas station. Oh, yeah.
What's up?
Do you want to start going over to the other spot, or do you want to stay here? Because he was over at the nightclub.
I want to see him if it's feasible.
Detectives have one investigation, but two crime scenes. Here, where a victim lies dead, and 2 miles away at a club where he was shot.
As the lead detective, you are very aware that you are fully responsible for the entirety of the investigation. And I took that responsibility and I held it in very high regard. Can you go to the incident location? Make sure that's squared away. Sure. I don't want a single person leaving.
Okay.
My name is Shannon Coolness, and I'm a former detective corporal with Gwinnett County Police Department. What's the victim's name?
D'Amico Riley, nicknamed Miko, recently graduated high school. He dreamed of owning his own auto shop. He was 19 years old.
He's got a defect in his hand. We found that he had 2 gunshot wounds, one in his hand and one in his chest cavity. Hey, Parker?
Yes.
Who was in the car?
2 females.
Miko was driven here by friends and family who were at the club.
They realized he was it when he got in the car.
He got himself into the car?
Fast we went over, grabbed his wrist, didn't feel a pulse. But she's like, we're not going to make it to the hospital.
Okay. Are you his mother?
Yes.
I'm very sorry for your loss. This is obviously the worst day of your life.
I got a telephone call. It was my stepdaughter on the phone saying he's been shot. I'm like, oh my gosh. And we jumped in the car and we, drove there. And that's where I saw him. And they were like, he was gone. That was like the worst moment in my life.
I'm gonna get you my card. We need to make sure we get the people responsible for his death. I've had family present at crime scenes before. However, I've never personally had them that upset at the location. It was incredibly tough.
Officers have found witnesses at the club where the shooting happened.
They got into a big fight.
All right, thanks. I'm gonna head to the scene. It looks like the victim was out at the club with a group of his friends. It seems they got in some sort of altercation with an opposing group. I don't know how many shooters there are going to be. I had patrolled West Precinct, and I was very familiar with the size of that parking lot. but I didn't realize until I got there how big that crime scene was actually going to be.
Y'all know the gist of the story of what happened, right?
When all the shooting started happening, everybody started running. Looking at that devastation, the damage from the bullets and all of the cars, windows broken, glass. It was kind of surreal. I'm Shelly Millsap. During this investigation, I served as coolness supervisor.
And then the girl gets hit as she's coming out the door.
A female was shot in the leg and she was taken to the hospital.
Doctors expect her to recover.
We don't have a clue who was shooting what. They said there was rounds going everywhere.
Let's go. There were some witnesses that had stayed around and were willing to cooperate to some extent. So, what happened?
The promoter guy comes in, he brings in like a group of people with all red on.
One of the female security guards had indicated that there was a large gathering of Blood Gang members to be present at the club. The Blood Gang is typically identified by the color red. In Gwinnett County, we do face a large number of street gangs and a large number of young kids that are unfortunately involved in them.
This song came on, and that's when all of the red bandanas come out. There was two guys. They was here by themselves.
The guard says two men stood out because they were dressed in blue. One of them was Miko.
The Crip Gang is identified by the color blue.
The guy either's not a blood or he's not gang related at all. The guy with the red bandana, he's up on the stage, so he flashes it in the guy's face.
She says a member of the Bloods began taunting Miko and his friend.
He's mad now because it is disrespectful on the street, you know what I mean? So the promoters say they escort them out.
And at that point, Miko was kicked out along with his friends. Unfortunately, the incident continued to escalate.
One of them started making phone calls. Turned back around, you got all kind of cars pulling in. He got anywhere from 15 to 20 people out here. A whole army of people, they start pushing out towards the door.
Bloods basically just barged their way out the front door, and that's kind of when everything started.
Now you hear, boom.
Who was shooting shots?
I can't say who was shooting. It was a lot of gunshots.
Who else was working in here with you?
Me, my officer, and my lieutenant.
She says there was another guard on duty named Chance Parker.
And no one's heard from Parker?
No. And they've been calling, nobody haven't heard any.
Okay, thank you. The fact that the security guard wasn't aware of where Parker went was incredibly suspicious to me.
4 hours into the investigation.
Oh, it's daylight. That's nice.
There's about 6 more shell cases up there.
Holy. When we came out of the club and it was daylight, it was even more shocking to see the spread of evidence. It was something I'll never forget. In total, we were able to recover approximately 80 shell casings.
The casings are 9mm, 10mm, and .40 caliber.
That was probably the biggest shootout in my experience of working homicide cases in Gwinnett. I've never been to one where there were that many shell casings recovered.
At this point, there were very few people that were talking. It was a very tough reminder that we were dealing with gangs.
I was worried about the age of the participants because the younger they are, they tend not to want others to see them talk to the police.
You're not gonna talk to Blue Shirt with me? What's going on, man?
But one witness has been waiting to speak his mind.
And then all of a sudden, security was shooting like over his head. He was down there, he was like that.
Shoot like that? Kind of like over his head, like he don't know what's going on?
Yeah. And I'm like, why is he shooting like that?
That witness told us that Parker was blindly and aimlessly shooting. It was a shocking moment. Did it look like his gun could be shooting shots into the crowd?
Yeah.
Chance Parker, at that point, was identified as suspect number 1 and the first person we needed to get a hold of.
So y'all ready for the night? Yeah.
This is the
25 years of life. Well, he would have been 25 and then 5 years.
to the date. This is just all about celebrating his life.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna hold it together as much as I can. I miss D'Amico coming up behind me, wrapping his arms around my neck. He was so tall, he would hover over me. He'd be like, you little, you know.
Miko was always just just a happy-go-lucky, quiet.
He's a sweet, nice, genuine young man.
Definitely. My nickname for Miko is
The good son. Him hopping up on the counter and talking to me while I was cooking food, because really he wanted to know when the food was going to be done. But, you know, that was kind of our thing, our time to sit and talk.
He would be in here harassing our life right now.
He would probably be trying to eat the chicken in the cabin. Right? I get a phone call, and it was D'Amico. And he said, Mom, these guys just tried to fight me because they tried to make me take off my shirt, and I wouldn't take my shirt off. And I said, well, you need to come home. And he said, I'm about to. And that was the last time I spoke with him. Anybody who thought D'Amico was in the gang obviously couldn't have known him. He just thought they were going out to have a good time. For people to think that he was a part of a gang, that just broke my heart.
Eight hours into the investigation.
If you throw rounds into a crowd and then beat feet and leave the scene, we gotta talk to you. It was an absolute priority to interview the security guard and to get his side of the story.
Chance comes back. Christopher Parker.
42-year-old Christopher Chance Parker just started working at Midnight Blue. A newlywed, he had been recently paroled.
Rape, simple battery, 2 counts, obstruction, ag battery. Holy.
We were all very surprised that he was able to obtain a job like a security guard. I want to try to track down other witnesses that put the security guard shooting.
Coolness reaches out to a witness who detectives spoke to last night.
I heard a bunch of gunshots ring out as soon as I walked out the door. One of the security guards started shooting too.
Convicted felons aren't supposed to carry firearms. He was at least committing a reckless act that could be considered aggravated assault.
Okay, did you see what kind of gun that man was firing off? The security guard?
His gun was like kind of a chrome nickel plate, maybe a 9mm.
If Coolness can match a weapon with the bullet that killed Miko, that could lead her to the killer's identity.
There were so many shell casings that were recovered, and we knew that there were different calibers. So once the autopsy was done, it was important for us to retrieve a projectile.
"34 hours in, when the medical examiner's report arrives.
So you have 80 shell casings. Nothing in the victim?
Through and through.
The round entered and exited the body, and we weren't able to recover it.
That makes anyone who fired a gun at the scene a murder suspect. And any shooter who's a felon could face a charge even more serious.
Anyone involved in a felony at the time that somebody is killed is culpable for the murder under the felony murder statute. And in this case, people firing into the crowd resulted in Miko's death. At this point, we were scrambling to find any other shooters. I have video, and there's a witness that I think could show me some of the players. I need somebody to start telling me what a shooter looked like.
Coolness's witness was there that night. She cues up security footage from an hour before the shooting.
You can have a seat if you want. Pull up a chair. You just let me know if you recognize anyone, okay?
Bloods. Crips.
It's incredibly weird to think of these gangs hanging out in the same nightclubs together, even though they're supposed to be rival enemies. But I think Gwinnett is very unique in that sense. You'll have people who have stable lives from the outside, at least, and their children are involved in gang activity and they just can't get them out of it because they're just so immersed in this culture and they don't want to break away.
Yeah, you see, he throwing up Crip signs. I think that's your 19-year-old.
He claims Miko, dressed in blue, was with the Crips.
Damn, he waved the flag in front of the dude's face.
If you are representing your set and waving your flag in somebody else's face, I would deem that as incredibly disrespectful. And I assume Miko thought that as well.
That's when it all started.
Okay.
That's the security guard that was shooting. Right there.
The witness points out Christopher.
Oh, man. You're good. All right, so they get kicked out. We'll keep playing. You recognize anybody else shooting?
That guy, him. He was shooting.
A second suspect was hanging out with the Bloods.
To identify another shooter, it was incredibly exciting.
I can't forget his face.
Oh, man.
Thank you, sir. Christopher Parker was one of the shooters at Midnight Blue.
The first 48 runs out, with Detective Coolness ready to serve a search warrant on Christopher.
For his sake, I hope he provides a very clear explanation as to what he did and why he did what he did.
I was nervous that we were potentially too late and we had lost some potential evidence.
Quick, please, search warrant! You got a foot?
Your emotion starts to flow because we already know he has a gun. There could be a shootout.
Quick, please!
Police, search warrant.
I take responsibility for the safety and security of every single person that assists with this investigation.
Clear.
It's awful when you go to do a search warrant and the person you're looking for is not there.
No holster, no gun belt, no ammo.
And then the evidence you're looking for is not there.
It's a good chance that he's armed right now and keeping them with him.
And you're trying to figure out, if it's not in their home, where else are we gonna look?
But then, 6 hours later, after he found out the police were at his house, Christopher Parker shows up at headquarters.
Hey, Chris. I was a little shocked that he was there.
Chris, I just need to figure out what all happened, what all went down, and everything like that.
Hopefully we would be able to get him to talk about what really happened.
So when we got to work promoting him, he said, man, I got a big old game coming.
The club was full of Bloods. It was the Red Sea of people wanting to make it known that they were representing that gang.
So it's a guy in there, he had like a blue shirt on and blue pants. So
He says when the trouble started, the club's promoter asked him to escort Miko and his friend out.
Now, in my opinion, whether they did it to try avoid a confrontation, most likely. But all they did was take the problem from inside the location to outside.
He called somebody, and next thing you know, a whole truckload of people pull up.
He claims Miko called in his friends.
So as they are coming this way, the other guys like literally pushing the doors coming out the club.
Is there kind of like a leader of the pack who's trying to start to bum rush y'all?
Yeah, I got the picture on my phone.
We can look at him if you're cool with that.
Yeah, I'm cool.
The man Christopher says rushed the door is the one identified as a shooter. But he wasn't the only one.
Did you at any point grab a firearm?
Nah.
I was fully prepared for him to lie.
See, I'm not even allowed to carry a gun. I'm a felon. I don't own a gun, so.
Okay, I'm not saying you own a gun. Go ahead, lie to me because I'm gonna work my ass off to prove that you're lying. That's it.
Yeah.
The phone will stay with Gwinnett County Police Headquarters until a search warrant's obtained for it.
No, don't take my phone.
Have a seat.
Don't take my phone.
Have a seat. Out of all the phones I have secured as evidence, I don't think anybody was ever too happy. Have a seat.
Don't take my phone.
Have a seat.
Yo, do not take my phone.
He became very defensive.
Which made me hopeful that something of evidence was going to be on there.
Give me my phone, do not talk to me.
No. Do you want to talk to me and tell me what happened?
Yeah, I'll talk to you.
We get that a lot. They believe that if they go outside, then they're not going to be recorded. We do still record them.
Okay, Chris. There's multiple shooters, okay? You were picked out. I don't think you intended to hurt anybody that wasn't trying to hurt you or others. Am I right in saying that? You're not in your head. I'm right in saying that, aren't I?
I think Christopher was wanting to tell us his side of the story, but being a felon, maybe there was an inherent fear to admit that he was in possession of a firearm.
I have people saying you shot into the air. Do you remember firing into the air?
Yeah. It was a very clear head nod in the affirmative. At what point did you fire?
I ain't firing with him.
That's your story?
I didn't fire with him.
Okay. That's it? That was him trying to admit what he had done, but then also recanting. It was upsetting. All right, stand up. Turn around.
I mean, for what?
Felony murder, aggravated assault, felon in possession of a firearm, reckless conduct, felony murder on that one as well. When we arrested Christopher was a big relief, but we knew full well that it was going to be more difficult to get the others.
Four days into the investigation,
This is the cell phone download from Mr. Parker's iPhone.
I need to identify the male in the red and black baseball shirt.
So we called our gang unit, and Detective Sims came up.
That is Kais Patrick. Boom, that's him.
His tattoo in the video, I see that over his right eye.
20-year-old Kais Patrick is recently out on bond in DeKalb County.
You could clearly see that it was the same person. It even had the same tattoo.
Well played, sir. Well played. We're gonna get with their folks there out of DeKalb County to figure out the best way that we'll be able to interview him.
10 days in, while the search is on for Kais,
We were able to get into Miko's phone.
the team gets access to Miko's text messages from the night he was murdered.
It seems to be like a group chat of sorts. He is saying, come to Midnight Blue, and then he's telling people to bring their sticks, which is a common term for gun. We didn't know for certain if Miko was an actual instigator or he just wanted help. Somebody's texting him back saying, "We trying right now. We're trying to bring our sticks."
Nice.
Coolness finds the texter's contact information.
I'm thinking it's possible that he could definitely be one of these shooters involved.
Two days later, the friend agrees to talk.
Okay. There is a message that says, "Yo, everybody pull up to Midnight Blue." We found it on Miko's phone. And then you said, "We on the way." So were you shooting? Okay. Did you see anyone else shooting?
Yeah, somebody with us was shooting.
For someone with intimate knowledge of the blue side to admit that they were present was a big deal for us.
I only heard one name. Old Block.
Who's Old Block?
I don't know his name. He's like, I just know about Old Block. The boys are screaming. They saw him shooting. But I didn't see him.
I'll be right back.
O-Block is the nickname of 20-year-old O'Shea Howard. He has a prior conviction for obstruction.
Identifying O'Shea was a great moment in the investigation. He was actually involved in a series of armed robberies throughout the county. It was a big day.
4 days later, O'Shea is picked up at a parole meeting.
I was incredibly hopeful. I just wanted to talk to him about his information.
I'm investigating the homicide of D'Amico Riley.
My brother, man.
All I'm trying to do, man, is figure out what happened. I have people telling me you were a shooter. I need to hear your story, bro. I need to.
I really, truly believe he was sorry that his friend had been shot and killed that night.
He was close with Miko.
So what happened?
When I pulled up from the club, Miko was fighting. And then that's when I heard gunshots.
Who was shooting those shots?
I wasn't looking.
So what did you do?
Tried to shoot. I shot like twice and then it started clicking.
I've never gotten a 100% full confession, and I don't know many people who have. But I do think he was incredibly honest with us with what he did provide.
O'Shea Howard is charged with felony murder.
Why O'Shea did what he did. His friend was actively engaged in a physical fight. However, O'Shea went to the location and brought a good part of the fight with him.
9 weeks after Miko's death, the third suspect, Kais Patrick, is arrested, also for felony murder.
We were able to work with our fugitive team to secure him during one of his bond meetings.
We ended up getting a statement from him. It wasn't him. He wasn't there. Sometimes that's as good as a confession. You can't really deny overwhelming evidence of you being present.
We knew that there was a possibility that we were never going to get all the shooters involved. Getting 3 people out of the possibility of numerous other shooters, it was a plus.
Christopher Parker's involvement was pretty heinous. From the reports that we had, he was an active participant. Obviously, Kais was probably the one that started it all. The softy in me, I don't think O'Shea is that bad of a guy. He's just so violent. I can't say he deserves any less. I did feel a great sense of pride in knowing that we did so much to turn over to the Gwinnett County DA's office.
Christopher Parker, Kais Patrick, O'Shea Howard. All 3 defendants could be responsible for Miko's death. But the prosecution will start with Christopher Parker.
Mr. Parker, through his actions, started what happened in the parking lot.
No way. This wasn't Mr. Parker's fight. We felt strongly about our chances at trial. We felt strongly about our chances that a jury would acquit Mr. Parker. My client, Christopher Parker, didn't cause this problem. He was there serving as security. He was trying to defuse the situation. My name is Lyle Porter. I'm an attorney licensed in the state of Georgia.
My client was defending his friend. My name is Leanne Hicks. I represented O'Shea Howard. O'Shea Howard is the nicest guy you'll ever meet. He's probably my favorite client I've ever represented. O'Shea's defense was he needed to shoot at these people to save his friend's life. There were a couple of thousand pictures taken at the scene of Midnight Blue.
It was like a fight at the OK Corral. There's no doubt about it.
It just didn't seem fair for either of our clients to be facing felony murder charges in the case.
Where the underlying felony is just simply being in possession of a firearm, it didn't sit well with me or my client.
Well, particularly since both of our clients had something to defend.
There were individuals on the scene that day that said, but for Mr. Parker firing his gun, they felt like they could have been injured or wounded. They were thankful that he took the action that he did.
And I'm like, really? Well, is he willing to tell me about it? My name is Rich Vandiver, and I'm a Deputy Chief Assistant District Attorney. Is he willing to talk to me and tell me what he knows about this situation? Because I ultimately want to use him as a witness in my case against Cais and O'Shea.
Porter responds, Christopher is willing in exchange for a deal.
If he went to trial and he got convicted, he was facing a mandatory minimum life in prison. I allowed him to be interviewed by Mr. Vandiver in the hopes that it might convince him that my client did not play the kind of role in this shootout that he thought he did.
Your livelihood is armed security, and you didn't check your rounds, you didn't check how big your clip was.
For one, I'm supposed to have one.
What I do in these interviews is I have a lot of information which is in my notepad, and I test what he's saying against what I already know. And he's no use to me if I know that information is not true.
I mean, it's true whether you believe it or not, it's true. Seriously, you want me to believe that? You want me to believe that you go to a job and you don't even know if there's rounds in your gun? Hey, I didn't check. So I didn't check. I'm just being honest, I didn't check.
I'm not playing with this. He's already looking at a murder charge. I can't put his information in front of a jury and expect them to buy what he's selling if he's not being truthful up front. So he's no good to me this way.
I'm not talking to him.
And if you want to talk to him, that's cool. We'll shut this off while you talk to him.
Sure.
But I'm not talking to him because that's not true.
All right.
Lyle knows I ain't bluffing. I'm not coming back and going to say, okay, we had a bad moment, we can talk, unless he's willing to give me truthful information.
Vandiver returns.
Mr. Parker needed to take advantage of that moment. If you're going to sit down and you're going to talk to him, then you need to be candid and open and tell him what you know.
When I fired my weapon, it was after the gunshot to protect the club, the people behind me, and myself. I fired after the first gunshot. And I told everybody, get out, get out, get out.
That's when things changed. He's acting according to witnesses and himself, at least for part of the time, to help individuals that are caught in a really bad situation.
So Mr. Vandiver offered a sentence to be reduced, and Christopher would testify truthfully at the trial of his co-defendants.
How does this make my case? Getting the jury to understand what's happening in the parking lot is a big part of it. And having an eyewitness who takes responsibility for their own part goes a long way in doing that.
Christopher Parker pleads guilty, but there are still 2 cases to go.
In December 2020, I had reached my retirement in Gwinnett. The case was handed over to Chris Lewis.
Kais Patrick's case was still pending, and O'Shea Howard's case was still pending. The major player in the case was Christopher Parker. He was the first person I wanted to talk to.
But then,
During the service of his sentence in the Georgia state prison system, he suffered a heart attack. He died.
With an unexpected death, you essentially lose any statements that person would have made. So you've lost that evidence. Kais Patrick and O'Shea Howard's attorneys are going to paint Christopher Parker as the responsible party. It becomes extremely more difficult and more fatal to the case without being able to produce Christopher Parker at trial. I was concerned that we'd have to dismiss the case at that point. With Christopher Parker being deceased, my total strategy changed for Kais Patrick and O'Shea Howard. My best opportunity at a conviction would be if I tried them together.
It benefited O'Shea more to have a separate trial, because if these two defendants were tried together, I was not allowed to present evidence against Kais.
Hicks's argument, Kais and O'Shea have very different defenses to mount.
O'Shea was not Team Blue. His allegiance was a personal allegiance to D'Amico. My client was defending his friend. Kais Patrick was Team Red. Team Red instigated the shots that were fired that night. I filed a motion to sever because I wanted the opportunity to have a separate trial.
Two months after Hicks files,
The judge did grant the motion to sever.
I was very disappointed that the judge had done that. It kind of ruined my whole strategy.
but Hicks is just beginning.
My argument came down to my client's constitutional right to present his defense, and I filed every motion that I could come up with.
These are just a sample of some of the motions that Leanne Hicks filed during this case.
I started out filing an amended special demurrer.
Amended special demurrer, basically challenging the form of the indictment. I don't necessarily agree with her legal analysis.
I then filed a motion to suppress in-court and out-of-court identification.
Two different types of motions to suppress identification.
I alleged that the method that was used to identify O'Shea was improper.
She filed a motion in limine
pursuant to OCGA section
16.324.2. So basically we'd have a mini trial before trial.
I then filed an amended motion to suppress. This motion had 38 paragraphs. And finally, I filed a motion to sever the charges contained in the indictment.
We dealt with that. I had to go back and read the transcripts from the prior hearings. It was frustrating to deal with the motions.
The case is now 5 years old.
Witnesses go missing, people's memory fades. A criminal case is not like fine wine. It does not get better with age.
The passage of time also gives Lewis another perspective on the case.
At the time we were dealing with motions in this case, I had just tried a murder case that was factually similar. A case that had much stronger evidence, and essentially the jury acquitted the defendant. And I had to watch a family go through that to get no justice whatsoever. It was heartbreaking to watch. I didn't want to see Nico's family have to go through a trial. I didn't think that we'd have a very good chance at getting convictions.
Chris Lewis called me at work one day and he was explaining the deal.
Lewis wants to offer a plea to O'Shea for both the death of Miko and unrelated armed robbery charges.
I was okay with that.
He asked me if O'Shea would consider a plea to a lesser offense of involuntary manslaughter. I knew that O'Shea would accept.
That leaves Kais Patrick as the only defendant. Unlike the other two, he did not offer a confession.
I thought that there was less evidence against Kais Patrick. I did offer him the same deal. Who fired the shot that killed Miko? We don't know. Based on all the facts of this case, it was the best outcome and justice was served. So Miko's family could have closure.
Street gangs. I find it very troubling that there is such a large pull here. Miko lost his life because of the wrong shirt, wrong place, wrong time.
We would like to thank everybody for coming because this is an occasion we're going to celebrate life for D'Amico Riley. It was Miko's 25th birthday here on Earth, 5 years of his birth in heaven. And let's focus on his birth in heaven and try to make this a happy occasion.
That was my boy. I talked to him about everything, you know what I'm saying? Teach him life lessons. He even teach me life lessons, being my little brother, you know.
I would like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. People came from Cincinnati, Alabama, a little bit of everywhere, and I want to thank everybody. If he was here, I would tell him that I love him.
Nobody heard the scream. That was a sentence investigators repeated for decades. Not because they knew it was true, because no one could prove otherwise. On the night of September 18, 1985, the town of Cypress Hollow, Florida, went to sleep under a sky thick with humidity and distant thunder. Porch lights flickered across quiet neighborhoods. Television sets glowed behind curtains. Crickets filled the silence. It looked like any other Wednesday night. By sunrise, the town had become the center of one of the most disturbing disappearances in Florida history. 29-year-old Emily Carter never arrived home. She left the Bayshore Financial Building at exactly 8:47 p.m., waving goodbye to the security guard as she crossed the parking lot carrying a brown leather purse, a folder filled with mortgage paperwork, and a disposable camera she had planned to develop the following weekend. She smiled. She unlocked her blue 1982 Chevrolet Cavalier. She disappeared. Those were the final confirmed moments anyone could place her alive. By 10:15 p.m., Emily's husband, Daniel Carter, had already called her office twice. No answer. He called her parents. Nothing. He drove the 20-minute route she normally took home, slowing at every intersection, checking every gas station, every convenience store, every empty roadside shoulder. Nothing. At midnight, local deputies officially listed Emily as a missing person. No one imagined that file would remain open for 40 years. The search began before dawn. Deputies walked drainage canals. Volunteers searched orange groves stretching for miles beyond the highway. Helicopters swept over swamps glowing beneath the morning sun. Tracking dogs followed Emily's scent from the office parking lot to the edge of the lot, then stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. As if she had simply vanished into thin air, the discovery of her car made the mystery even darker. At 6:32 a.m., a highway maintenance worker noticed a blue sedan parked beside an abandoned boat ramped nearly 12 miles from Emily's office. The engine was cold. The driver's window was halfway down. The keys remained in the ignition. Her purse rested neatly on the passenger seat. Her wallet. Credit cards. Cash. Wedding ring. Everything appeared untouched. Everything. Except Emily. There were no obvious signs of violence. No blood. No shattered glass. No broken fingernails. No torn clothing. It looked less like the scene of a crime, and more like someone had carefully erased one. News spread through Cypress Hollow within hours. People gathered outside grocery stores whispering theories. Parents refused to let children walk to school alone. Businesses closed early. For the first time in years, residents locked their doors before sunset. Headlines exploded across Central Florida. Young accountant vanishes without a trace. Mystery surrounds abandoned vehicle. Florida woman missing. Police have no suspects. Television crews arrive before the weekend. Satellite trucks line Main Street. Reporters interviewed neighbors who described Emily as reliable, friendly, impossible to dislike. She volunteered at the local library. She visited her parents every Sunday. She never missed birthdays, never ignored phone calls, never disappeared. Investigators immediately examined the obvious possibilities. Did she run away? No. Her savings account remained untouched. Her passport stayed inside a bedroom drawer. She packed no luggage. Had she been abducted? Possibly. But where was the struggle? Where were the witnesses? Where was the evidence? Detectives reconstructed every minute of her final day. She bought coffee at 7:42 a.m. She attended 2 client meetings. She called Daniel during lunch. She balanced company records until closing. She joked with co-workers before leaving. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. Nothing suggesting that, within hours, she would become the face of a mystery that would haunt an entire generation. Then came the first strange detail. The security guard, Harold Benson, remembered seeing another vehicle in the parking lot after nearly everyone had gone home. Not unusual. Employees occasionally work late. But Benson recalled something else. The headlights never turned on. The vehicle remained parked in complete darkness, waiting. He could not describe the driver. He could not identify the license plate, only that it was a dark pickup truck. Investigators searched for the truck. Thousands of tips poured in. Every black pickup in 3 counties was checked. Nothing matched. Nothing led anywhere. Days turned into weeks. Weeks became months. The search area expanded. Divers searched lakes. Search teams entered dense cypress swamps where visibility dropped to only a few feet. Cadaver dogs reacted several times. Every search ended the same way. False alarm. Emily Carter remained missing. The Carter family refused to stop searching. Daniel printed thousands of flyers. Church groups organized volunteer searches every weekend. Radio stations aired public appeals. Someone had to know something. Someone had seen something. Someone was keeping quiet. Then, almost 3 months after Emily vanished, investigators received an anonymous phone call. The caller spoke only one sentence. "You already searched the wrong place." The line disconnected. Police traced nothing. No recording. No fingerprint. No witness. Only 7 words that would become legendary among investigators. "You already searched the wrong place." Search teams returned to the boat ramp. Nothing. They expanded into nearby marshland. Nothing. They excavated abandoned lots. Nothing. The caller was never identified. Years passed. The case cooled. Evidence boxes filled shelves inside the sheriff's evidence warehouse. Witnesses moved away. Some died. Others forgot. The headlines disappeared. Television crews found newer tragedies. Emily Carter became another cold case. Another photograph inside a faded folder. Another family trapped between hope and grief. Every September 18th, Daniel visited the boat ramp. He stood beside the rusting guardrail, holding flowers no one would ever see. He never remarried. Never sold their house. Never changed the answer machine greeting, because Emily's voice was still on it. Friends begged him to move on. He answered the same way every year. People move on from certainty. I never got certainty. By the mid-1990s, DNA technology transformed criminal investigations across America. Detectives reopened hundreds of forgotten files. Emily's case was reviewed. Every item collected in 1985 was tested. Hair fibers, clothing, cigarette butts, latent fingerprints. Nothing. Again, the file returned to storage. Another decade passed. Hurricanes came and went. The town expanded. The old Bayshore Financial Building was demolished. A shopping plaza replaced a parking lot where Emily had last been seen. New families moved into Cypress Hollow without ever hearing her name. But inside evidence locker 14B, one cardboard box remained untouched, brown, dust-covered. Its evidence seal faded almost white. Across the front, written in black marker, were 4 words. Carter, Emily, unsolved. In February 2025, the sheriff's office launched a digital archive project. Every unsolved case would be scanned, every photograph restored, every piece of physical evidence cataloged using modern forensic imaging. Detective Ava Ramirez volunteered for the project. She had spent 15 years working homicide. She believed cold cases deserved the same attention as new ones, sometimes more, because every unanswered case represented someone who had run out of time. 3 days into the review, Ramirez noticed something no investigator had mentioned in 40 years. One crime scene photograph showed Emily's abandoned car from the driver's side. Ordinary. Another photograph captured the passenger seat. Ordinary. But the third image showed the inside of the driver's door under direct flash photography. Near the chrome handle, barely visible, was a faint smudge. Not dirt. Not damage. A partial latent fingerprint that technicians in 1985 had marked as insufficient for comparison. Ramirez enlarged the image using modern enhancement software. The ridge detail sharpened. More lines appeared. Then more. Enough to reconstruct a usable print. 40 years earlier, it had been dismissed as worthless. Now, it looked complete. She stared at the monitor without blinking. If the print belonged to Emily, it meant nothing. If it belonged to Daniel, nothing. If it belonged to an investigator, nothing. But if it belonged to someone no one had ever identified, everything about the case was about to change. The fingerprint was uploaded into the national database late that afternoon. The computer estimated the search would take several hours. Ramirez left the office after midnight. She barely slept. At 5:18 the following morning, her phone vibrated. One notification. One automated message. Possible match identified. She opened the report. Read the name once. Then again. Her heartbeat accelerated because the fingerprint did not belong to a stranger. It belonged to someone interviewed during the original investigation. Someone detectives dismissed after only 15 minutes. Someone who had quietly lived less than 30 miles from Cypress Hollow for 4 decades. And someone who had spent 40 years believing one tiny fingerprint had disappeared forever. The name on the screen did not belong to a drifter. It did not belong to a convicted killer. It did not belong to a man whose face had appeared on wanted posters or evening news broadcasts. It belonged to Richard Nolan. 40 years earlier, detectives had interviewed him once. The conversation lasted just 14 minutes. The transcript filled barely 3 pages. After that, his name disappeared from the investigation forever. Detective Ava Ramirez stared at a computer monitor, reading the report again and again, hoping she had overlooked a mistake. She hadn't. The fingerprint lifted from the inside of Emily Carter's driver's door matched Richard Nolan with a statistical certainty modern forensic analysts considered overwhelming. 40 years, 1 fingerprint, 1 forgotten name. Ramirez immediately requested the original interview file. The folder arrived from the archives 30 minutes later. Yellow paper, rusted staples, coffee stains, a smell of dust and aging cardboard. Inside was the interview conducted on September 20th, 1985. Richard Nolan. Age 33. Occupation, air conditioning technician. Residence, 12 miles east of Cypress Hollow. Reason for interview, witness. Nothing more. According to the report, Nolan told investigators he had stopped near the abandoned boat ramp around 9:30 p.m. because his pickup truck was overheating. He claimed he never saw Emily, never saw another vehicle, never spoke to anyone. His truck cooled. He drove home. The deputy conducting the interview asked routine questions, verified his address, recorded his license plate. thanked him for his time. Case closed. No background check. No follow-up interview. No fingerprint comparison. Nothing. Ramirez leaned back in her chair. Something wasn't right. If Nolan truly had nothing to do with Emily Carter, how had his fingerprint ended up inside her driver's door? Not outside. Not on the roof. Inside. Exactly where someone might place a hand while opening the door. She called the forensic laboratory. Run the enhancement again. We already did. Run it again. Hours later, the answer returned. Same conclusion. Same identification. Same confidence level. The fingerprint belonged to Richard Nolan. News of the match never reached the media. Not yet. Ramirez wanted to understand Nolan before anyone else knew his name. She began rebuilding his life from 1985. Employment records, tax filings, property ownership, marriage license, traffic citations, everything. At first glance, he looked painfully ordinary. Married, 2 children, steady employment, no violent criminal history, no arrest for assault, no history of domestic abuse. The kind of man neighbors describe with the same words. Quiet, helpful, reliable, but experienced detectives rarely trusted first impressions. People often build ordinary lives around extraordinary secrets. The deeper Ramirez looked, the stranger Nolan's history became. Between 1984 and 1987, he changed jobs 4 times. He moved 3 times within the same county. Every move placed him farther away from Cypress Hollow. Not dramatically. Just enough. Almost as though he wanted distance without attracting attention. Then another detail surfaced. On the afternoon Emily disappeared, Nolan had received a repair request at Bayshore Financial Building, the same office where Emily worked. The work order had been buried inside company maintenance records, never collected during the original investigation. Arrival time, 2:18 p.m. Departure, 4:07 p.m. Emily was still inside the building, working. Nolan had access to every hallway, every office, every employee parking area. The realization sent a chill through Ramirez. Richard Nolan had not randomly appeared in the investigation. He had been inside the building only hours before Emily vanished. Detectives reopened the timeline. At 2:18 p.m., Nolan enters Bayshore Financial. At approximately 4 p.m., co-workers later remembered seeing an HVAC technician working near the second-floor records room. Emily's office sat 20 feet away. No one had connected those facts. Not in 1985. Not until now. Ramirez interviewed former employees. Most remembered little. 40 years changes memories. Faces disappear. Voices fade. But one retired receptionist paused when shown Nolan's photograph. I know him. You do. I've seen that face before. She closed her eyes, searching, thinking, then slowly nodded. He kept asking strange questions. What kind of questions? He wanted to know who usually stayed late. Ramirez stopped writing. What exactly did he ask? The woman frowned. I remember because it felt odd. He asked which employees usually left alone. Silence filled the interview room. The receptionist continued. I thought he was just making conversation. She looked at Nolan's picture again. I wish I'd trusted my instincts. Investigators now had something they had never possessed before. Possible pre-contact. Possible surveillance. Possible planning. But fingerprints and suspicious conversations still weren't enough. Ramirez needed more. She obtained a warrant to collect Nolan's current fingerprints. Officially. Legally. The comparison removed every remaining doubt. It was him. Every ridge. Every bifurcation. Every microscopic detail. A perfect match. The sheriff authorized discreet surveillance. Richard Nolan was now 73 years old. Retired. Widowed. Living alone in a modest house outside Ocala. Every morning he bought coffee at exactly 6:40. Every Tuesday, he played cards with neighbors. Every Thursday, he visited the same hardware store. Routine. Predictable. Calm. Nothing about him suggested the center of a 40-year mystery. Yet Ramirez couldn't shake the feeling. People capable of hiding terrible secrets often become experts at appearing ordinary. Investigators examined Nolan's old pickup truck registration. The vehicle no longer existed. Scrapped in 1993. Convenient. But maintenance records remained. One repair invoice dated September 21st, 1985, 3 days after Emily disappeared. Described replacement of the passenger side interior door panel. Reason listed. Water damage. Ramirez frowned. Water damage? Only one door? No flood. No accident report. No insurance claim. Why replace a single interior panel days after a woman vanished? She tracked down the mechanic. Miraculously, he was still alive. 91 years old, living in assisted care. His memory wandered through decades like fog drifting over a swamp. Most questions produced shrugs. Then Ramirez showed him Nolan's photograph. His eyes sharpened. I remember him. You do? He insisted I replace the panel. Why? The old mechanic laughed softly. Didn't make sense. What do you mean? He said somebody spilled fish bait. Ramirez waited. The mechanic shook his head. Didn't smell like fish. What did it smell like? The old man looked away. I've worked around blood before. The room became completely silent. He swallowed hard. I never forgot that smell. The statement wasn't proof. Memory after 40 years is fragile, but combined with everything else, it was becoming difficult to dismiss. Meanwhile, forensic analysts re-examined every item collected from Emily's car. Most had degraded beyond usefulness, except one, the disposable camera. Still sealed, still undeveloped. Investigators in 1985 believed the film contained family photographs unrelated to the disappearance. Budget limitations prevented processing. It had remained inside evidence storage ever since. 40 years, never opened. Modern specialists carefully developed the surviving negatives. Most images were exactly what everyone expected. Birthday parties, sunsets, friends laughing at a barbecue. Then came the final frame. The picture was blurred, taken through glass. Probably accidental. But after digital enhancement, a reflection appeared. A man standing behind Emily in the office parking lot. Not close enough to identify immediately, but close enough to see one unmistakable detail. A company uniform. HVAC. Ramirez enlarged the image, pixel by pixel. The company logo became clearer. Not perfect. Just enough. It matched the contractor that employed Richard Nolan in September 1985. For the first time since Emily Carter disappeared, investigators weren't chasing theories. They were following evidence. Real evidence. Evidence that had waited 40 years inside forgotten boxes. But the most terrifying discovery was still ahead. Because while reviewing Nolan's financial records from 1985, an analyst noticed a payment made exactly 2 days after Emily vanished. Cash, large amount, made to a construction supply company. The invoice described only 3 words: ready-mix concrete delivery, and the delivery address had never appeared anywhere in the original investigation. The address sat on the evidence board like a loaded weapon. 3 numbers. 1 county road. A property no investigator had ever searched. Detective Ava Ramirez stared at the faded invoice while the room around her grew quiet. Ready-mix concrete. Delivered 48 hours after Emily Carter disappeared. Paid entirely in cash. No building permit. No inspection records. No explanation. 40 years earlier, it had been nothing more than another business transaction. Now it looked like the missing piece of an impossible puzzle. The address belonged to an abandoned citrus farm, nearly 18 miles west of Cypress Hollow. In 1985, the property had been owned by Richard Nolan's older cousin, Frank Nolan. The farm closed in the early 1990s after several devastating freezes. The buildings collapsed. The machinery rusted away. Nature reclaimed the roads. Today, satellite images showed little more than dense palmetto, towering oaks, and the cracked outline of what had once been a large equipment shed. Ramirez assembled a small team. No media. No public announcement. If the property contained evidence, they could not risk contamination. At sunrise the following morning, 3 sheriff's vehicles rolled through the broken entrance gate. The gravel road had almost disappeared beneath weeds. Spanish moss hung from ancient oak branches, swaying gently in the humid air. The deeper they drove, the quieter everything became. Even the birds seemed absent. Only insects filled the silence. The old equipment shed still stood, barely. Its tin roof sagged under decades of storms. Wooden walls leaned at impossible angles. One corner had completely collapsed. Ramirez stepped out of her vehicle. The smell of wet earth mixed with old rust. Nothing looked remarkable. Nothing suggested this forgotten place had any connection to one of Florida's most famous cold cases. Then the forensic survey began. Ground-penetrating radar slowly crossed the property. The screen showed tree roots, old irrigation pipes, buried scrap metal. Normal. Then the technician stopped walking. A large rectangular anomaly appeared beneath the concrete floor inside the equipment shed. Perfectly straight edges, nearly 12 feet long. Artificial. Not natural. Everyone in the room looked at the monitor. Nobody spoke. Ramirez quietly nodded. Start documentation. Forensic photographers moved into position. Every angle, every measurement, every inch recorded. Hours later, workers carefully cut through the aging concrete. The slab was much thicker than expected, nearly twice the normal depth. Fresh concrete in 1985, old concrete beneath it. Someone had poured a second layer. The jackhammer echoed across the empty property. Dust filled the air. Broken concrete slowly disappeared into buckets. Then the machine stopped. The operator raised his hand. There's something here. Every investigator moved closer. Not bones. Not clothing. Plastic. Heavy black plastic. Buried beneath nearly 2 feet of concrete. Forensic specialists immediately halted excavation. No one touched anything. The entire scene transformed from a property search into an active crime scene. The package was photographed exactly where it rested. Measurements were taken. Soil samples collected. Finally, wearing sterile gloves, investigators carefully lifted the deteriorating plastic. Inside was another layer. Blue construction tarp. Then heavy rope. Then a cardboard storage box. Waterlogged. Collapsed, but still sealed. Ramirez felt her pulse quicken. Evidence boxes are supposed to preserve answers. This one had been hidden beneath concrete for 4 decades. The forensic team slowly opened the lid. Inside were dozens of items. A woman's shoe. A broken wristwatch. Receipts tied together with fading rubber bands. Several photographs. A silver bracelet. And at the very bottom, a small cassette tape. No human remains. No immediate explanation. Only objects. Objects someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to bury forever. Every item was transported to the crime laboratory. The tape attracted immediate attention. It appeared remarkably well preserved. Forensic audio specialists spent 2 days drying, cleaning, and stabilizing the magnetic ribbon. Nobody knew what it contained. Music, blank recording, family conversation, or something far worse. When the machine finally played the recording, everyone inside the laboratory remained completely silent. At first, nothing. Static. A faint mechanical hum. Then voices. A man. A woman. The recording quality was poor. Words drifted in and out beneath decades of degradation. Technicians enhanced the audio. Again. Again. And again. Gradually, fragments became understandable. Female voice. I don't even know you. Silence. Male voice. Just get in. More static. Something slammed. The sound of a car door. Breathing. Then the woman again. Louder this time. Please. The recording abruptly ended. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Ramirez removed her headphones slowly. It could be anyone. The forensic audio examiner nodded. It could, but we're not finished. Voice comparison specialists began analyzing the male speaker, old interviews, employment recordings, home videos obtained from Nolan's family. Everything was digitized. Days later, the preliminary report arrived. The conclusion was cautious, not definitive, but deeply disturbing. The unknown male voice shared significant vocal characteristics with Richard Nolan, not enough to identify beyond doubt, enough to justify continuing the investigation. Meanwhile, another forensic team examined the photographs recovered from the buried box. Most were badly damaged, colors washed away, edges fused together. One photograph, however, survived almost perfectly. It showed the interior of the Bayshore Financial Building, taken after business hours. The hallway lights were off. Only emergency lighting illuminated the corridor. Standing near the accounting office, a woman, Emily Carter. She appeared unaware that someone was photographing her from a distance. Ramirez stared at the image. This wasn't a random snapshot. Someone had been watching Emily before she disappeared. Someone had followed her inside the building. Someone had documented her routine. The discovery transformed the investigation. Detectives no longer believed Emily had been chosen by chance. They believed she had been targeted. Carefully, patiently, methodically, investigators returned to Richard Nolan's employment records. His maintenance assignments covered the Bayshore Financial Building for nearly 3 months before Emily vanished. 3 months. Long enough to learn employee schedules, parking habits, security routines. Long enough to notice who worked late. Long enough to become invisible. The receptionist's statement suddenly carried terrifying new meaning. He kept asking who stayed late. It wasn't curiosity. It was preparation. Then forensic analysts uncovered something even stranger. The buried receipts recovered from the concrete box included gasoline purchases, hardware stores, restaurants, completely ordinary transactions, except one. A receipt from September 17th, 1985, the night before Emily disappeared. The location, Harper's Camera Shop. Ramirez immediately contacted the retired owner. He remembered almost nothing from 40 years earlier, until investigators showed him the receipt. His expression changed. I remember this order. What made it memorable? He wanted the fastest film available. For what purpose? He said. The old man paused. He said he needed photographs that could be taken in the dark. Ramirez wrote the words slowly. Every answer seemed to create another question. Every discovery suggested planning, preparation, patience. But despite mounting circumstantial evidence, one critical element remained missing. They still could not prove exactly what happened to Emily Carter. No body, no murder weapon, no eyewitness, no confession, only a trail of forgotten evidence leading steadily toward one man. And Richard Nolan still had no idea that investigators were quietly rebuilding the night he believed had disappeared forever. Richard Nolan did not know the past was coming back for him. For 40 years, he had lived with the confidence of someone who believed time had erased every trace, every memory, every question, every mistake. But detectives had learned something important about cold cases. Time does not destroy the truth. It only hides it. And sometimes, the longer a secret survives, the more evidence it leaves behind. The investigation into Emily Carter's disappearance had transformed overnight. What was once a missing person case had become something far darker, a carefully constructed mystery, a trail of hidden evidence, a story that appeared to have been buried beneath concrete, forgotten records, and decades of silence. But investigators still faced their biggest challenge. They needed to understand Richard Nolan, not just where he was, not just what evidence connected him, but who he really was. Because the most dangerous people are not always the ones everyone fears. Sometimes they're the ones nobody notices. The neighbor who waves every morning, the co-worker who helps fix a broken machine, the quiet man who never raises his voice. Richard Nolan had spent 4 decades building that exact image. Ordinary, invisible, safe. Detectives began interviewing people who had known him throughout his life. Former co-workers, neighbors, friends, family members. At first, the descriptions were nearly identical. Quiet, polite, kept to himself, never caused trouble. But as investigators asked deeper questions, small cracks began appearing. A former co-worker from the early 1990s remembered something unusual. Nolan hated being questioned, not openly, not aggressively, but enough to notice. If you asked him where he had been or what he was doing, he would become uncomfortable. The co-worker paused, like he was protecting something. Another neighbor remembered a strange habit. Every year around September, Nolan left town for several days. No explanation, no visitors, no phone calls. Just gone. When asked about it, he always gave the same answer. Personal trip. For decades, nobody questioned it. Why would they? Richard Nolan was just Richard, the retired technician, the quiet neighbor, the man who brought extra tools when someone needed help. But investigators now saw the pattern differently. September, the same month Emily disappeared, the same month the anniversary of the crime approached every year. Ramirez requested Nolan's travel records. Most years showed nothing. But one year stood out. A week after Emily disappeared, Richard Nolan withdrew a large amount of cash from his bank account. Then he drove south. No destination listed. No hotel records. No reason. Just a long drive away from Cypress Hollow. The evidence continued building. But Ramirez knew something. A prosecutor would need more than suspicious behavior. They needed the final connection. The moment that proved Richard Nolan was not simply near the crime. He was responsible. That evidence came from an unexpected place. A storage unit. During the investigation, detectives discovered Nolan had maintained a storage unit outside Ocala for 26 years. The unit was rented under a different name, not an alias, a variation of his middle name, small enough to avoid attention, but enough to delay discovery. Inside, investigators found boxes, old tools, family items, tax documents. Nothing unusual. Until the back corner, hidden behind a false wall, a second storage area. Inside were dozens of objects carefully wrapped in plastic. Old newspapers, maps, photographs, and a handwritten notebook. The notebook immediately attracted attention. The handwriting analysis team compared it to known samples from Nolan. The result came back within days. A match. Page after page contained dates, locations, notes. Some were ordinary, others were disturbing. One entry from September 1985 contained only 3 words. She noticed me. No name. No explanation. Just 3 words. But investigators believed they knew who she was. Emily Carter. Another page contained a rough map, a route from Bayshore Financial Building to the abandoned boat ramp to the old citrus farm. The same route investigators had spent years trying to understand. The same locations connected by evidence. The same path that appeared impossible to explain. Until now. The notebook suggested something terrifying. Richard Nolan had not acted suddenly. He had watched, planned, recorded. The investigators now believed Emily had been targeted weeks before her disappearance. Not days. Weeks. The photographs from the buried box supported that theory. Images of Emily entering work, leaving work, walking through the parking lot, living her normal life. Someone had been studying her routine. Someone had been waiting. The question investigators now faced was not only what happened to Emily, it was how many opportunities Richard Nolan had before that night. Detectives searched old missing person cases from nearby counties. A disturbing pattern appeared. Several women had disappeared between 1983 and 1987. Most cases were never connected. Different towns, different investigators, different circumstances. But one similarity remained. Each victim disappeared after being last seen near locations where Richard Nolan had worked. The discovery created a new wave of concern. Was Emily Carter the first, or was she simply the first case where the evidence survived? A special task force was created to review unsolved disappearances across Florida. Families who had spent decades waiting for answers received unexpected phone calls. Investigators reopened files. Old evidence was tested. New interviews were conducted. The past was coming alive again. Meanwhile, Richard Nolan continued living normally. He still went to the grocery store, still greeted neighbors, still watered plants outside his home. He had no idea detectives were watching him, but investigators noticed something. After news reports about the revived Emily Carter case began circulating, Nolan changed. He stopped leaving his house. He canceled weekly card games. He avoided neighbors. It was subtle, but investigators noticed. People who hide secrets often recognize when those secrets are threatened. The first official interview with Nolan occurred on a rainy Tuesday morning. Detectives arrived at his home. No arrest, no accusation, just questions. Nolan opened the door calmly. For a moment, he looked exactly like the person everyone described, a harmless elderly man. Then Ramirez asked one question. Do you remember Emily Carter? The change was immediate, almost invisible, but real. His eyes moved away. His hands tightened. A small reaction. But enough. I don't know anyone by that name. Ramirez placed a photograph on the table. Emily, young, smiling. Nolan looked at it for only 2 seconds, but investigators noticed recognition. Not confusion. Recognition. You were interviewed in this case, Ramirez said. I talked to police. You also worked at her office. I worked in many buildings. You left a fingerprint inside her vehicle. Silence. The room changed. For the first time in 40 years, Richard Nolan had no prepared answer. He looked at the detectives, then at the photograph, then down at his hands. I don't know how that happened. It was the same phrase investigators heard countless times. The phrase people use when the evidence becomes impossible to explain. But Ramirez was not finished. She placed a photograph from the buried box on the table, the one showing Emily inside the office, then the receipt, then the notebook page, then the audio analysis report. One by one, the pieces appeared. The story became impossible to ignore. Nolan stared at the evidence. His expression remained controlled, but something had changed. The confidence was gone. The certainty was gone. 40 years of believing he had escaped were collapsing in front of him. Then Ramirez asked the question detectives had been waiting decades to ask. Where's Emily Carter? For several seconds, Richard Nolan said nothing. Rain tapped against the windows. The room remained completely still. Then he whispered something so quietly the recorder almost missed it, a sentence that would change the entire investigation. I never thought anyone would find that place. The detectives looked at each other, because those words were not a denial. They were something else. They were a doorway. And behind that doorway was a truth investigators had been searching for since 1985. I never thought anyone would find that place. Those words changed everything. For 40 years, investigators had searched for answers hidden somewhere in the darkness surrounding Emily Carter's disappearance. They searched roads. They searched rivers. They searched abandoned buildings. They searched through thousands of pages of reports. But they had never heard the one thing they needed most. a confession hidden inside a single sentence. Richard Nolan had not admitted everything. Not yet. But detectives knew something had shifted. The man sitting across from them was no longer the calm retired technician who believed the past was untouchable. For the first time in decades, the weight of what he had hidden was beginning to break through. The interview continued, slowly, carefully, every word recorded, every movement observed, because after 40 years, investigators understood one thing. The smallest detail could become the difference between suspicion and truth. Ramirez leaned forward. "What place are you talking about, Richard?" Nolan looked toward the window. Outside, rain continued falling over quiet Florida neighborhood. Children played somewhere in the distance. A lawnmower started. A normal afternoon. A normal world. A world that had continued moving while one family waited for answers. "I don't know," Nolan finally said. A weak response. A familiar response. The kind of answer detectives expected. But Ramirez noticed something. His voice had changed. The confidence was gone. His first words were defensive. Now they sounded tired. Like someone carrying a burden too heavy to hold anymore. Investigators asked about the citrus farm, the concrete, the buried evidence, the cassette tape, the photographs. Each question created a longer silence. Nolan denied involvement, then admitted being there, denied knowing Emily, then admitted speaking with her, denied remembering the night, then corrected himself. It was a long time ago. Detectives understood. The wall was cracking, not collapsing, but cracking. They continued carefully, because a confession after 40 years does not arrive like it does in movies. There is rarely a dramatic breakdown, rarely a sudden admission. Instead, it happens slowly. A person reveals one small truth, then another, until the story they created becomes impossible to maintain. The investigators asked about the first meeting. Nolan closed his eyes. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he spoke. "I fixed the air conditioning unit near her office. We know. She talked to me. What did she say? Nothing important." But detectives knew that wasn't true. People do not photograph someone repeatedly without interest. People do not record schedules without reason. People do not bury evidence beneath concrete without fear. Something happened long before September 18th, 1985. Something investigators still needed to uncover. They reviewed Nolan's history again. This time, they looked differently. Not for evidence of crime, for evidence of obsession. The photographs, the notes, the questions about Emily's routine, the hidden records. The pattern was becoming clearer. Richard Nolan had created a world where Emily existed only as someone he observed, someone he followed, someone he believed he understood. But Emily was not a mystery. She was a person with a life, a person with choices, a person who had no idea someone was watching. Investigators discovered another forgotten piece of evidence from 1985, a voicemail recording recovered from Bayshore Financial's old phone system. The technology was outdated. The tape was damaged, but forensic experts restored part of it. The message was recorded at 8:51 p.m., for minutes after Emily left the building. The voice was unclear, but the words were terrifying. A woman speaking quickly, breathing heavily. "Someone is following me." Then silence. The recording ended. No one in 1985 had connected it to Emily, because the phone system automatically deleted most messages after 30 days. This one survived only because of a technical malfunction. 40 years later, it became another piece of the puzzle. Ramirez listened repeatedly. The voice was not confirmed as Emily, but the timing, the location, the circumstances, everything matched. The discovery changed the emotional center of the case. Emily may have known something was wrong. She may have realized she was being followed, and she may have tried to reach someone, but she never got the chance. Investigators now focus on the minutes between 8:47 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. The missing window. The time when Emily disappeared. The time when Richard Nolan's story had to fit. It didn't, according to Nolan's original statement. He was already at the boat ramp because his truck overheated, but phone records showed his home was contacted at 9:12 p.m. The caller? Richard Nolan. The call lasted 19 seconds, meaning he was able to communicate from somewhere, but his original statement placed him far from any phone. Another lie. Another crack. Investigators confronted him with the information. For the first time, Nolan became emotional. I forgot. You forgot making a phone call? I forgot a lot of things. But detectives knew. Memory does not forget convenient details. Not after 40 years. Not when those details protect someone. The investigation expanded again. Search teams returned to the citrus farm. This time with a different objective. Finding the location mentioned by Nolan. The place nobody would find. Using the notebook map, investigators identified an area behind the old irrigation field. A section of land that had never been searched. Not in 1985. Not after. Because in the original investigation, police focused on the visible structures. The house. The shed. The equipment area. Nobody looked beyond the tree line. The search began at sunrise. Ground scanners moved slowly across the field. The air was heavy. The kind of Florida morning where every breath feels warm. After 3 hours, the equipment detected something unusual, a disturbance beneath the soil. Not large, but artificial, a rectangular shape, several feet deep. The team began excavation, layer by layer, dirt removed, evidence documented, every movement recorded. Then, beneath years of soil and vegetation, they found another container, smaller than the first, wrapped in industrial plastic, sealed, hidden, waiting. Inside were personal items, a driver's license, a broken necklace, a watch, a journal, and a letter. The letter was never mailed. It was addressed to Emily. The handwriting matched Richard Nolan. The contents were not a confession. Not exactly. It was something much more disturbing. A letter written as if Emily was still alive. As if Nolan believed he had a relationship with her that never existed. As if he had created an imaginary connection between them. Investigators read the first lines in silence. I know you don't understand why I did this. The sentence stopped everyone, because for the first time, the evidence revealed something beyond the crime. It revealed the mind behind it. Richard Nolan had not simply hidden evidence. He had preserved pieces of fantasy. A fantasy built around a woman who never gave him permission to enter her life. A fantasy that ended with Emily disappearing. The forensic team continued examining the container. Then they found something that made every investigator in the room freeze. A small photograph, not of Emily, not of Nolan, but of the abandoned boat ramp, taken after the search began, after police had arrived, after investigators were already looking. The photograph proved something impossible. Richard Nolan had returned to the scene after Emily disappeared. He had watched the investigation. He had watched people search for her. He had stood nearby while a community begged for answers, and he had remained silent. For 40 years, investigators believed they were chasing a ghost. Now they realized something far more disturbing. The ghost had been watching them back. The case that had remained frozen since 1985 was finally moving. But the deeper investigators went, the more they discovered that Emily Carter's disappearance was not one terrible moment. It was a chain of choices. A chain that began long before the night she vanished. And Richard Nolan had spent 4 decades protecting every link. The photograph changed the entire investigation. For decades, detectives believed Richard Nolan had disappeared into the background after Emily Carter vanished. They believed he had been a witness, a person of interest for a brief moment, a name buried among hundreds of interviews. But the photograph proved something far more disturbing. Richard Nolan was not just connected to the case. He had remained close to it. He had watched. He had followed the investigation. And while Emily's family searched for answers, the person who knew the most may have been standing nearby. The discovery created a new urgency. Investigators returned to every statement Nolan had ever made, every interview, every conversation, every sentence. Because when someone lies for 40 years, the truth is often hidden between the lies. The first interview from 1985 suddenly looked different. At the time, detectives believed Nolan was cooperative. He answered questions. He provided his information. He allowed investigators to inspect his truck. Nothing seemed unusual. But now, reading the transcript with modern eyes, detectives noticed details they had missed. Nolan volunteered information nobody had asked for. He described the boat ramp. He described the location of Emily's abandoned car. He described the weather conditions. All before investigators had released those details publicly. At the time, it seemed like a helpful witness remembering details. Now it looked different. How did Richard Nolan know so much? The question became one of the central points of the investigation. Detectives began comparing Nolan's original statements with known facts. The differences were everywhere. He said he arrived at the boat ramp because of engine problems. But his vehicle inspection from 1985 showed no mechanical issue. He said he never entered Emily's vehicle, but his fingerprint was inside the driver's door. He said he never knew Emily personally, but photographs showed he had documented her movements. Every answer created another contradiction, and every contradiction led investigators closer to the same conclusion. Richard Nolan had not simply been near the crime. He had built a false version of events around it. The next major breakthrough came from the old cassette tape recovered from the concrete box. Forensic audio experts continued restoring the recording. The first analysis had revealed fragments. A woman. A man. A struggle. But with advanced technology, more details began appearing. The background noise was enhanced. A vehicle engine could be heard. A door opening. Rain hitting metal. Then a sound investigators had not noticed before. A vehicle radio. Experts isolated the frequency. The station matched one local radio channel broadcasting an evening program on September 18, 1985. The timing was exact. The recording was made during the same period Emily disappeared. The tape was not proof by itself, but it placed the event in a very specific window, a window that matched Richard Nolan's movements. Then investigators discovered something else, a second voice, very faint, almost impossible to hear. A few words, but enough. The voice appeared to say, "Please don't do this." The laboratory compared the female voice with recordings of Emily from family videos. The result was not considered a complete identification, but analysts determined the voices had strong similarities. The Carter family was informed. For them, the discovery was devastating. After 40 years of uncertainty, they were forced to confront the possibility that Emily's final moments had been captured on tape, a moment that should never have existed, a moment someone had preserved. The family requested privacy. They did not want headlines. They did not want cameras. They wanted only one thing, the truth. And investigators were determined to give them that. The search for more evidence continued. Detectives examined every location connected to Nolan, his former homes, his workplaces, his storage units, his vehicles. One address stood out, a small rental property where Nolan lived from 1986 to 1989. The landlord remembered something strange. Nolan had made renovations before moving in. A basement wall had been rebuilt. The landlord assumed it was routine maintenance. But when investigators reviewed construction records, they found something missing. There were no permits, no contractor information, no explanation. The basement was searched. Behind a newer section of drywall, investigators discovered another hidden compartment. Inside were newspaper clippings, not about Emily, about the investigation. Hundreds of them. Every article, every television report, every public statement, Richard Nolan had collected the case. He had preserved the story of the woman he was accused of harming. Among the clippings was one article circled repeatedly. The headline read, "Police search continues for missing Florida woman." Below the headline, Nolan had written one sentence. "They still don't know." Investigators stared at the note because it revealed something chilling. He was not simply hiding from the investigation. He was following it, watching it, almost studying it. The evidence suggested that Richard Nolan had remained emotionally connected to the crime for decades, not because of guilt alone, but because the disappearance had become part of his identity. The case was no longer just about what happened to Emily. It was about understanding why someone would carry a secret for so long. Psychological experts reviewed the evidence. They described a pattern: obsession, control, fantasy. The belief that a person could create a connection without the other person's agreement. They explained that some offenders do not see victims as complete individuals. They see them as part of the story they have created, a story where they are the main character, a story where reality becomes something they rewrite. Investigators believed Emily Carter was not chosen randomly. She was chosen because Nolan had spent time observing her, learning her routine, creating a false sense of familiarity. And when reality did not match his fantasy, something changed. The final piece of the timeline came from a former employee at Bayshore Financial, a man named Peter Walsh. He had never been considered important in 1985. He worked maintenance at the building. He remembered Nolan. He remembered Emily. And he remembered something he had never told police. The week before Emily disappeared, he saw Nolan waiting near the parking lot. Was he working? No. What was he doing? Walsh looked uncomfortable. He was watching. Watching what? Her. That single statement reopened a forgotten possibility. The crime had not happened suddenly. It had been developing. Slowly. Quietly. In plain sight. The final week before Emily vanished was reconstructed. Monday. Nolan repaired equipment near her office. Tuesday. He asked employees about schedules. Wednesday. He purchased specialized camera film. Thursday. He watched the parking lot. Friday. Emily disappeared. The timeline was no longer random. It was a sequence, a plan, a pattern. And investigators finally understood why the case had remained unsolved for so long. Because in 1985, they were looking for a stranger, someone who attacked and disappeared. They never considered that the person responsible had spent months becoming familiar, becoming invisible, becoming someone nobody feared. Richard Nolan had not broken into Emily's world. He had slowly entered it. And by the time anyone realized he was there, it was already too late. As detectives prepared the case for prosecution, one final discovery emerged from the evidence archive: a missing evidence report, a document showing that one item collected from Emily's vehicle in 1985 had never been processed. A small object, almost forgotten. But according to the report, it contained biological material, material that could now be tested, material that might finally answer the last remaining question. What exactly happened inside Emily Carter's car that night? And who was with her during her final moments? 40 years after the disappearance, the answer was sitting inside an evidence box, waiting. The evidence box had been sitting untouched for nearly 40 years. A small brown container, a faded label, a handwritten case number from 1985. To anyone passing by, it looked meaningless. Another piece of forgotten evidence from another forgotten investigation. But inside that box was something investigators had searched for since the beginning: a final connection. A piece of the truth that had survived when everything else had disappeared. The missing evidence report was discovered during the final audit of Emily Carter's case files. The document was simple, almost too simple. A list of items collected from Emily's abandoned vehicle. A purse, a set of keys, a folder of documents, a camera, a fabric sample, and one item that had never been tested: a A small piece of cloth recovered from the driver's side door handle. In 1985, investigators had marked it as possible transfer material. Nothing more. The technology did not exist to analyze it properly, so it was placed into storage, then forgotten. For decades, the cloth remained sealed, waiting. When forensic analysts received the sample in 2025, they immediately understood the importance. Old evidence was fragile. Every test had to be performed carefully. One mistake could destroy what remained. The laboratory began with DNA extraction. The first attempt produced almost nothing. The second produced a weak profile. The third changed everything. A partial DNA profile was recovered. Not enough for a complete identification, but enough for comparison. Investigators already had a sample from Richard Nolan. They waited for the result. The entire case had reached this point. 40 years of questions. 40 years of uncertainty. Everything now depended on a microscopic piece of evidence. A few surviving cells. A few strands of genetic material. The laboratory completed the comparison 2 days later. The report arrived at 8:16 a.m. The conclusion was clear. The DNA profile recovered from the cloth was consistent with Richard Nolan. The probability of a random match was extraordinarily low. The evidence that had been considered useless in 1985 had become the strongest link in the case. Detective Ava Ramirez read the report silently. For a moment, nobody in the room spoke, because everyone understood what it meant. The fingerprint connected Nolan to Emily's vehicle. The photographs connected him to her routine. The notebook connected him to planning. The buried evidence connected him to the aftermath. And now the DNA connected him directly to the final moments inside that car. The investigation was no longer built on suspicion. It was built on proof. But one question remained. Why had Nolan kept the evidence? Why had he saved the photographs? Why had he hidden the tape? Why had he preserved reminders of a crime that could have destroyed his life? Investigators searched deeper into Nolan's psychology. They examined journals, letters, personal documents. The discoveries painted a disturbing picture. Richard Nolan did not behave like someone trying to forget. He behaved like someone trying to preserve control. He wanted to own the story. Even decades later, the hidden collections, the newspaper clippings, the recordings, they were not just evidence. They were trophies, a private archive of something he believed belonged only to him. But there was another discovery. A document found inside the storage unit. A handwritten list. Names. Dates. Locations. At first, investigators believed it was another record connected to Emily. Then they noticed a pattern. Several names belonged to women who had reported suspicious encounters with a man matching Nolan's description. Some had reported being followed. Some had reported unwanted contact. Some had simply disappeared from public records. The list changed the investigation completely. Emily Carter may not have been the only person Richard Nolan had watched. A special review team began examining old cases across Florida, across neighboring states. The pattern was unsettling. Cases once considered unrelated suddenly contained similarities. Women disappearing near locations where Nolan had worked. Reports involving a dark-colored pickup truck. Unexplained evidence. Missing details. The possibility became impossible to ignore. Richard Nolan may have hidden more than one secret. The investigators contacted families who had spent decades without answers. For some, the calls brought hope. For others, pain. Because solving one case sometimes means reopening many others. Each family carried their own unanswered questions. Each person had their own Elizabeth, their own missing photograph, their own empty chair at the dinner table. The investigation expanded rapidly, but prosecutors focused on the strongest case, Emily Carter, because this was a case where the evidence had survived. This was the case where the truth could finally be proven. Richard Nolan was officially arrested on a quiet Monday morning. There were no dramatic scenes, no chase, no confrontation, just a sheriff's vehicle arriving outside his home. Nolan opened the door. He looked at the officers, and for several seconds he said nothing. The detective holding the warrant later described his reaction. He looked like someone who had been waiting for this day. Nolan was taken into custody without resistance. The news spread across Florida within hours. A 40-year-old mystery had finally been broken. Headlines appeared everywhere. Cold case cracked. Fingerprint and DNA evidence solved 1985 disappearance. Missing Florida woman's final moments revealed after 4 decades. Retired technician arrested in decades-old mystery. The town of Cypress Hollow reacted with shock. Many residents remembered Emily's disappearance. Many remembered the fear, the searches, the flyers, the hope that she would somehow return. Some struggled to believe that the answer had been nearby all along, that the person responsible had been living quietly among them. For Emily's family, the arrest brought complicated emotions. There was relief. There was anger. There was grief. But most importantly, there was certainty. After 40 years of wondering, they finally knew. The waiting was over, but the investigation was not finished, because during preparation for trial, prosecutors discovered another hidden file, a document that revealed Richard Nolan had almost been caught decades earlier, a report from 1985, a report that had been misplaced. Inside was an interview summary from a witness investigators had forgotten, a witness who claimed to have seen Nolan near Emily's vehicle, a witness whose statement could have changed everything. But the report had been filed incorrectly, buried, ignored, lost. Until now, the witness was still alive, and when investigators found her, she revealed something that sent chills through the entire department. She had not just seen Richard Nolan. She had seen what he was doing. She had seen him standing beside Emily's car on the night Emily disappeared, and she had tried to tell police 40 years earlier, but somehow her warning disappeared. And now, after decades of silence, that voice was finally returning. For 40 years, one witness believed she had failed Emily Carter. Her name was Linda Brooks. In 1985, she was 26 years old, a waitress at a small roadside diner, located less than a mile from the abandoned boat ramp where Emily's car was discovered. She was not famous. She was not a detective. She was not someone investigators considered important. She was simply a person who happened to be in the wrong place at the right time, or perhaps the right place at the only moment that mattered. When detectives finally located her in 2025, Linda lived quietly in northern Florida. She had spent decades avoiding attention. She had never appeared on television, never spoken publicly about Emily Carter, never told anyone the full story, because she believed nobody would listen. The original investigators had listened, but only briefly. And then her statement disappeared into the thousands of pages inside the case file. A forgotten voice, a forgotten warning, a forgotten chance. When Detective Ava Ramirez sat across from Linda, she placed the old statement on the table. Linda stared at the paper. Her hands began shaking. I thought this was gone forever. Ramirez looked at her. Why? Because that's what happened to everything connected to Emily. Silence filled the room. Then Linda began speaking. On September 18th, 1985, she was finishing her shift at the diner. The night had been slow. Rain clouds were moving in. Most customers had already left. Around 9:10 p.m., she stepped outside to smoke a cigarette before closing. From the parking lot, she could see the road leading toward the boat ramp. She remembered hearing an engine. Not unusual. People use the area for fishing, but then she noticed something. A blue car, parked near the entrance. Emily's car. At the time, she didn't know that. She only remembered seeing a woman standing beside it. A few seconds later, another vehicle arrived. A dark pickup truck. Linda remembered the truck because of one unusual detail. The passenger side door was covered with a large white scrape. She watched as a man stepped out. She couldn't see his face clearly, but she remembered his clothing. A work uniform. Dark pants. a light-colored shirt, and something hanging from his belt, a tool pouch. The man walked toward the woman. At first, Linda assumed they knew each other, a couple arguing, a friend helping, something ordinary. Then she heard the woman's voice, not loud, not screaming, but frightened. The words were unclear until one sentence. "Please leave me alone." Linda froze, because those 4 words changed the entire meaning of what she was seeing. She wanted to call someone. She wanted to walk closer, but fear stopped her. She watched from a distance. The man moved closer. The woman stepped backward. Then the rain became heavier. Visibility disappeared. Linda went back inside the diner for less than 5 minutes. When she looked again, the blue car was still there. The truck was gone. The woman was gone. And she assumed everything had been resolved. She had no idea she had just witnessed the beginning of a 40-year mystery. The next morning, when news spread that a woman had disappeared, Linda immediately called police. She gave them everything she remembered: the truck, the uniform, the argument, the direction the vehicle left. But according to the old records, her statement was categorized as unconfirmed observation. No follow-up, no sketch artist, no vehicle search, nothing. Why? Investigators reviewing the old file found the reason: a note written by the original detective, possible unreliable witness due to distance and weather conditions. Ramirez stared at the note for a long time, because the witness had not been unreliable. She had been ignored. A single decision 40 years earlier had changed the direction of the entire investigation. If Linda's statement had been followed, Richard Nolan might have been identified immediately. The dark pickup truck, the work uniform, the location, everything matched. But in 1985, the investigation moved in another direction. Detectives focused on strangers, random crime, unknown suspects. They never realized the person they were looking for had already spoken to them. Richard Nolan, the helpful witness, the cooperative technician, the man who volunteered information. Linda's testimony became one of the final pieces prosecutors needed, but the interview revealed something else, something even more disturbing. Linda remembered one additional detail: the truck. She had seen the driver's side mirror. Attached beneath, it was a small metal tag, a company identification plate. She didn't know what it meant in 1985, but investigators did now. It matched the equipment issued to Richard Nolan's employer. Another connection, another piece of evidence that survived decades of silence. The prosecution's case was now overwhelming. Fingerprint, DNA, audio evidence, hidden documents, photographs, witness testimony. But Richard Nolan still refused to confess, even after his arrest. Even after the evidence was presented, he maintained the same position. "I don't remember." 3 words repeated over and over. No explanation, no details, no apology. His defense attorneys argued that memories after 40 years could be unreliable. They questioned the handling of old evidence. They questioned the interpretation of the recordings. They questioned whether the investigation had been influenced by public pressure. But prosecutors had something rare in cold cases: a complete timeline, a story that connected every piece. They showed the jury how each discovery led to another: the fingerprint inside the vehicle, the hidden camera photographs, the concrete burial site, the notebook, the DNA, the witness who saw Nolan near Emily's car. Each piece alone raised questions. Together, they created a picture that could not be ignored. During the trial, Emily Carter's family sat quietly in the courtroom. They had waited for decades of birthdays without answers, for decades of holidays with an empty seat, for decades wondering whether Emily was still somewhere. Now they finally heard the truth. The prosecutor described Emily not as a victim in a file, but as a daughter, a wife, a friend, a person whose life had been stolen. The courtroom listened as details from 1985 were presented. The final phone message, the abandoned car, the hidden evidence, the years of silence. And then came the moment nobody expected. Richard Nolan requested to speak. The courtroom became silent. Everyone waited. After 40 years, would he finally explain? Would he finally reveal what happened? Would he finally give Emily's family the answers they deserved? Nolan stood slowly. He looked older than his 73 years. The confidence that once protected him was gone. His voice was quiet, almost impossible to hear. I thought time would erase it. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then he continued. I thought eventually everyone would stop looking. The judge watched him carefully. The prosecutor remained silent. And then Richard Nolan said something that revealed the darkest truth of all. I was wrong. The courtroom waited for more. But Nolan stopped. No confession. No explanation. Only those two words. I was wrong. And somehow, that made the silence even heavier. Because everyone understood. He had spent 40 years believing the past was buried. But the past had been waiting. Waiting inside a fingerprint. Waiting inside a photograph. Waiting inside a forgotten box. Waiting for someone to finally look again. The trial moved toward its final stage. And the last evidence presented would reveal the one thing investigators had never known. The truth about where Emily Carter had spent the last hours of her life. A location hidden for decades. A place Richard Nolan believed nobody would ever find. A place that would finally answer the question that haunted Florida since 1985. Where was Emily Carter? The question had haunted investigators for 40 years. Where was Emily Carter? For decades, that question had remained unanswered. Her car was found. Her belongings were found. Her name remained in the headlines. But Emily herself was missing. A person reduced to photographs. A voice preserved only through memories. A life frozen on the night. She never came home. Now, inside a courtroom filled with 4 decades of pain, investigators finally prepared to reveal the discovery that would close the final chapter. The location Richard Nolan believed nobody would ever find. The place hidden beneath layers of soil, concrete, and silence. The place connected to the words he had whispered during his interview. I never thought anyone would find that place. Those words had led investigators back to the citrus farm. But the farm had revealed more questions and answers. The first hidden container, the notebook, the photographs, the letters. They proved obsession. They proved secrecy. They proved Nolan had hidden evidence. But they did not explain where Emily had gone until forensic teams returned to property one final time. Using information recovered from Nolan's personal notes, investigators focused on a forgotten section of land beyond the old irrigation fields. A place marked on one of his handwritten maps. A location nobody had noticed. A location Nolan never mentioned. The search area was small, less than half an acre. But investigators treated every inch as if it contained history, because it did. Every shovel, every brushstroke, every piece of disturbed earth, everything was documented. Then, after hours of searching, the equipment detected something unusual. Not a large structure, not a container. Something much smaller. A disturbance beneath the roots of an old oak tree. The same oak tree that appeared on Nolan's hand-drawn map. The same location circled 3 times. The excavation began slowly. No one spoke. The entire team understood what they might discover. The possibility that had followed them from the beginning. The answer Emily's family had waited decades to receive. When the soil was removed, investigators found a sealed area beneath the tree. The discovery was immediately treated as a potential recovery site. Forensic specialists arrived. The area was secured. The entire process was recorded. And after hours of careful excavation, they found human remains. The investigation that began as a disappearance had finally reached its most painful conclusion. Emily Carter had been found. 40 years after she vanished. 40 years after her family last heard her voice. 40 years after the town of Cypress Hollow wondered if she might somehow return. The identification process took several weeks. Dental records, DNA comparison, medical analysis. Every test confirmed the same devastating truth. The remains belonged to Emily Carter. The news traveled quickly, across Florida, across the country. People who remember the case decades earlier watched as the final mystery disappeared. But for Emily's family, the discovery brought emotions no headline could capture. Relief, grief, anger, peace. All at once, they finally had answers. But answers do not erase pain. They only replace uncertainty. At the sentencing hearing, Emily's family spoke publicly for the first time in years. They did not focus on Richard Nolan. They focused on Emily, the person she was before becoming a cold case, her favorite songs, her habit of leaving notes on the refrigerator, her laughter, her plans. The future she never got to experience. They wanted the world to remember something important. Emily Carter was not a mystery. She was not a headline. She was a person whose story deserved to be told. Richard Nolan listened without emotion. The courtroom remained silent as Emily's family described the decades they spent waiting, the birthdays, the anniversaries, the unanswered questions, the moments when they thought the phone might ring, when they thought someone might finally know. The prosecutor later said the most powerful part of the trial was not the evidence. It was a reminder that every cold case represents real people, real families, real lives interrupted. The evidence against Nolan was overwhelming. The jury reached a decision after only a few hours. Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom. 40 years of uncertainty ended with one word: guilty. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded investigators. They asked the same question. How did this case survive for so long? Detective Ava Ramirez gave a simple answer. Because evidence remembers. A fingerprint remembers where a hand touched. A photograph remembers what someone saw. A recording remembers what someone said. Evidence can wait, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades, but it does not forget. The investigation also changed how law enforcement viewed old cases. The Emily Carter case became a symbol of what modern forensic technology could accomplish. A reminder that cold cases are not dead cases. They are unfinished cases. Across the country, investigators began reviewing old evidence connected to other disappearances. Files once considered impossible were reopened. Technology that did not exist in 1985 was now changing the future. DNA analysis, digital enhancement, advanced databases, methods capable of reaching backward through time. Because time was no longer the enemy. It was simply another obstacle, and obstacles could be overcome. But the case left behind one haunting question. How close had investigators been in 1985? The answer was painful. Very close. Richard Nolan had been interviewed. His truck had been seen. His fingerprints were there. His connection existed. The truth was present, but the technology was missing. The attention was missing. The pieces were scattered. And 40 years passed before someone put them together. The forgotten witness, the untested evidence, the overlooked fingerprint, the missing report, every mistake, every missed opportunity, every unanswered question. They all became part of the story. Because solving a cold case is rarely about finding one perfect clue. It is about recognizing the importance of the clues that were always there. The Emily Carter investigation proved something investigators around the world already knew. A case does not disappear just because people stop talking about it. The file may close. The headlines may fade. The world may move forward. But somewhere, evidence remains, waiting, watching, holding on to the truth. The final chapter of the investigation came months later, when Emily's belongings were returned to her family. Among the recovered items was the small disposable camera, the same camera that captured the final photographs connected to the case. Most images had faded. Most memories had been damaged by time. But one photograph remained clear. Emily standing outside her home, smiling, alive. Before everything changed, her family chose that image for her memorial, not the crime scene photographs, not the newspaper headlines, not the picture associated with disappearance. They chose the image of Emily before the mystery, before the fear, before the decades of waiting, because in the end, the story was never about the person who took her away. It was about the person who deserved to be remembered, Emily Carter, a woman who disappeared in 1985, a woman whose case became a symbol of unanswered questions, a woman whose truth survived longer than the person who tried to bury it, and a woman whose story finally received the ending her family had waited 40 years to hear. But even after the verdict, even after the evidence, even after justice arrived, one final mystery remained, a question investigators could not ignore. How many other secrets had Richard Nolan buried? Because inside his hidden archives, inside his old notebooks, inside the records recovered from his storage units, there were still names, still dates, still places, and investigators were beginning to wonder, was Emily Carter the only cold case Richard Nolan left behind? The conviction of Richard Nolan should have been the end. For most people, it was a headline, a courtroom decision, a decades-old mystery finally solved. After 40 years, Emily Carter's family finally had the answer they had searched for. The town of Cypress Hollow finally knew what happened. Investigators finally closed a file that haunted their department for generations. But inside the evidence room, one question refused to disappear. Was Emily Carter the only person Richard Nolan had left behind? Because the deeper detectives looked into Nolan's hidden records, the more they realized something disturbing. The Emily Carter case was not an isolated event. It was a pattern buried beneath years of silence. And now investigators had to decide whether solving one cold case had uncovered something much larger. The review began quietly. No press conference. No public announcement. Just detectives sitting inside a room surrounded by boxes. Old files. Old photographs. Old names. Cases that had been forgotten. Investigators created a timeline of Richard Nolan's movements. Every job. Every address. Every city. Every unexplained connection. Then they compared that timeline with unsolved disappearances across Florida and neighboring states. At first, there was nothing. Random names, random locations, random circumstances. But after weeks of analysis, the similarities started appearing. Women between the ages of 20 and 40 disappeared after leaving work. Last seen near commercial buildings. Vehicles recovered with little evidence. Cases that seemed impossible to connect. Until Richard Nolan's name appeared. The discovery changed the direction of the investigation. A special cold case task force was created. Their mission was simple. Find out whether Emily Carter was the beginning or the end. Investigators returned to Nolan's storage units. The first search had focused on Emily. Now they examined everything. Every notebook. Every photograph. Every receipt. Every handwritten note. The smallest details mattered. One box contained dozens of old maps. Most appeared meaningless. Highways. Back roads. Rural properties. But forensic analysts noticed something. Several locations matched areas connected to unsolved cases. A highway outside Georgia. A rest stop in Alabama. A rural road near the Florida border. Places where women had disappeared decades earlier. The maps were not random. They were records. A private catalog of places Nolan had visited. Investigators began matching dates. The results were disturbing. One map contained a handwritten mark dated 1987. That date matched the disappearance of a woman named Sarah Whitmore. Sarah vanished while driving home from work. Her car was discovered near a closed gas station. No suspect. No explanation. For 38 years, her family had waited. Now detectives were reopening the case. Another map showed a location connected to a missing woman from 1991. Another matched a 1993 disappearance. The possibility became impossible to ignore. Richard Nolan may have carried secrets far beyond Cypress Hollow. The investigation expanded. Families who had stopped expecting answers began receiving phone calls. For some, it was a call they had dreamed about. For others, it was a call they feared. Because reopening a cold case means reopening old wounds. It means returning to the moment when everything changed. Investigators understood the responsibility. They were not just searching for evidence. They were searching for people. People who deserved to be remembered. People whose families deserved the truth. Meanwhile, Richard Nolan remained in prison awaiting additional hearings. He refused to discuss the other cases. Every question received the same answer. I don't remember. But detectives noticed something. When specific names were mentioned, he reacted. A slight movement. A change in expression. A moment of hesitation. Small details. But investigators who spent years studying behavior knew. Silence can reveal as much as words. One investigator requested another interview. Nolan agreed. This time, he appeared different. Older. More tired. The confidence that protected him for decades had disappeared. The detective placed photographs on the table. Not of evidence. Of victims. Women whose families were still waiting. You know these names. Nolan stared at the table. No. You remember these places. No. You remember Emily. A long silence. Then Nolan looked up. I remember all of them. The detective froze. The room became silent. It was the first time Nolan had admitted remembering anyone. Who are they? Nolan looked away. I don't know. A frustrating answer, but a revealing one, because for 40 years he had claimed he remembered nothing. Now he admitted he remembered everything. Investigators continued pressing. What happened to them? Nolan refused to answer. Why keep the records? Silence. Why keep the photographs? Silence. Why keep the names? Finally, Nolan spoke. Because nobody else cared. The detective stared at him. What does that mean? Nolan looked toward the wall. People disappear. His voice became quieter. Then everyone forgets. The statement disturbed investigators because it revealed something about how Nolan viewed his crimes, not as acts against individuals, but as stories he believed belonged to him, a dangerous mindset, a belief that he controlled the narrative. The interview ended without a confession, but it provided something else, confirmation. Nolan knew more than he admitted, much more. The investigation continued for months. New forensic testing was performed. Old evidence was reviewed. Some cases produced answers. Others remained uncertain. But one discovery stood above the rest. A journal entry found hidden beneath the lining of an old toolbox. The date. September 18th, 1985. The night Emily disappeared. The writing was short. Only one paragraph. But it revealed Nolan's state of mind. I thought she understood. Investigators stared at the sentence because it confirmed something they had suspected. Emily was not a random victim. Nolan believed there was a connection that existed only inside his own mind. He had created a relationship that Emily never shared. And when reality challenged that fantasy, everything changed. The psychological evaluation became a major part of the investigation. Experts explain that obsession can grow quietly. It can appear as admiration, attention, interest, until it becomes something dangerous, something controlling, something disconnected from reality. Emily Carter's case was not just a story about evidence. It was a story about warning signs, about things people noticed but ignored, the unusual questions, the repeated appearances, the uncomfortable feelings, the moments that seemed too small to matter, until they mattered. As investigators continued reviewing Nolan's history, another file arrived, a missing person report from 1984, 1 year before Emily disappeared. The victim had never been connected to Nolan until now, because of the location where she vanished. was the same location where Nolan worked. And inside the file was a piece of evidence that had never been analyzed, a fingerprint. A fingerprint collected decades earlier. A fingerprint that had been sitting in storage, waiting. Just like Emily's, investigators prepared the test. They knew the result could change everything. Because if the fingerprint matched Richard Nolan, then Emily Carter's case would no longer be a single tragedy. It would be the beginning of something much darker. Something that had been hidden for decades. And once again, the truth was waiting inside a forgotten piece of evidence.